I had been searching for the perfect vintage lamp to add to my apartment decor for weeks when I stumbled upon an ad on Craigslist. The ad described a beautiful vintage lamp with intricate details and a soft, warm glow. It was exactly what I had been looking for. I quickly sent a text to my friend Sarah, who is also a lover of vintage finds. To my delight, Sarah was just as excited about the lamp as I was. We decided to split the cost and arranged to meet the seller at his house later that day. As we arrived at the address the seller had provided, my nerves began to jangle. I had never bought anything from a stranger on Craigslist before, let alone gone to their house. But my desire for the lamp outweighed my reservations, and I followed Sarah to the door. The man who greeted us was middle-aged and had a friendly smile. He led us through his house to the lamp, which was even more stunning than it had appeared in the ad. I felt a surge of excitement and knew that I had to have it. As Sarah and I were admiring the lamp and discussing how we would split the cost, the man interrupted us. "Would you like to see my collection of vintage dolls?" he asked. His voice was friendly, but there was something about the way he asked that made my skin crawl. I shot a look at Sarah, but she seemed intrigued. "Sure," she said, smiling. I hesitated, but didn't want to ruin Sarah's fun. The man led us to another room filled with dolls of all sizes and styles. They were arranged on shelves and propped up on chairs, and some even had their own little outfits. I felt that something was strange about him. The man was standing too close to us, and his smile was a bit too wide. But Sarah was so engrossed in the dolls that she didn't seem to notice. Just as I was about to suggest that we leave, the man turned to me and said, "I have a special doll that I think you'll love. Would you like to see it?" I shook my head and said, "No, thank you." But the man just kept smiling and inching closer to me. I felt my heart racing and my palms getting sweaty. What had we gotten ourselves into? The man's smile widened as he approached me with a strange look in his eyes. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I think you really like this doll." I could feel Sarah's eyes on me, and I knew she was wondering why I was acting so hesitant. But something about this man and his doll collection was just not right. "No, thank you," I repeated, taking a step back. But the man continued to move closer until he was practically standing right in front of me. And then he reached out and placed the doll in my hands. At first, I didn't know what to think. The doll was beautiful, with long curly brown hair and a pink dress. But as I looked closer, I realized there was something strange about its eyes. They seemed to follow me wherever I went, as if they were alive. I quickly handed the doll back to the man, my spine is tingling with fear. "We should go," I said to Sarah, grabbing her arm. As we made our way to the door, the man called out to us. "Wait," he said. "You forgot your lamp." I had completely forgotten about the lamp, and I felt a twinge of guilt for being so rude to the man. But as he handed me the lamp, I noticed something odd. It was heavier than I had expected, and it made a strange rattling sound when I moved it. I didn't have time to investigate further, as the man was already leading us to the door. "Come back, any time," he said, waving goodbye with that same creepy smile. As we walked down the street, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, and then I realized that I was still holding the doll. I quickly threw it into a nearby trash can and tried to forget about it. But something told me that we had just walked into something much more sinister than a simple Craigslist transaction, and I could still feel so strange. After our encounter with the man and his strange doll collection, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. Sarah, on the other hand, seemed to have completely forgotten about the creepy experience and was excitedly chatting about how the lamp would look in her apartment. But strange occurrences began happening around us. Objects in our apartment would move on their own. Doors would open and close without explanation, and we both began having nightmares about the man and his dolls. I tried to convince myself that it was all just a coincidence, but the feeling of being watched never left me. And then one day, I received a text message from an unknown number. "Did you like the doll?" the message read. My heart raced as I stared at the message, feeling sick to my stomach. How had this person gotten my number? And how did they know about the doll? I showed the message to Sarah, and we both agreed that we needed to go to the police. But when we arrived at the station, they told us there was nothing they could do. After all, we had willingly gone to the man's house, and there was no evidence of any wrongdoing. Feeling frustrated and scared, we returned to our apartment. But the strange occurrences only seemed to be getting worse. And then, one night, Sarah disappeared. I searched everywhere for her, but she was nowhere to be found. And then, just when I thought all hope was lost, I received another text message. "Come back to my house if you want to see your friend again," the message read. I knew it was a trap, but I had no choice. I had to save Sarah. Trembling with fear, I made my way back to the man's house. It was dark and silent, and I could hear my heart pounding in my chest as I approached the front door. I hesitated for a moment before ringing the doorbell. There was no answer at first, but then I heard shuffling footsteps from inside, and then the door slowly creaked open. The man was standing in the doorway, his eyes wide and his smile wider than ever. "Hello again," he said, beckoning me inside. I didn't want to go in, but I had to find Sarah, and so I stepped inside, trying to ignore the feeling of dread that was building in my stomach. The man led me to a small room at the back of the house, where I saw Sarah sitting on the floor, tied up and gagged. I rushed over to her, frantically untying the ropes that bound her. But as I was untying her, I heard something moving behind me. And then I saw the dolls. They were everywhere, lined up along the walls and staring at me with their lifeless eyes. I could feel their presence, and I knew that they were watching me. Suddenly, the man lunged at me, his hands wrapping around my throat. I struggled to break free, but he was too strong. And then I remembered the lamp. I grabbed it from the nearby table and swung it at the man's head. He stumbled backwards, giving me just enough time to grab Sarah and run for the door. As we raced down the street, I could feel the man's eyes on me, but we had escaped, and I knew that we were finally safe. Or so I thought. After our harrowing escape from the man's house, Sarah and I thought that we could finally put the horror behind us. But it seemed like the man and his dolls weren't done with us yet. Strange things continued to happen in our apartment, just like before. Doors would slam shut when no one was around. Objects would move on their own, and we could hear faint whispers in the dead of night. The worst part was the feeling of being watched. I couldn't shake the sensation that someone was always lurking just around the corner, waiting to pounce. Sarah and I tried to ignore the haunting, but it was getting worse with each passing day. We were both exhausted and constantly on edge, and I could see the fear in her eyes whenever we were alone. And then one night, we saw the man again. We were sitting in our living room, trying to watch TV to distract ourselves from the constant sense of dread. And then I saw him in the corner of my eye, standing in the hallway outside of our apartment. He was staring at us, his expression twisted into a sinister grin. And then he vanished into thin air. Sarah and I were both screaming, but there was no one there to hear us. We were completely alone, trapped in our own nightmare. The haunting continued for weeks, until we finally couldn't take it anymore. We packed our bags and left the apartment, hoping that we could escape the man and his dolls for good. But I knew deep down that they would always be with us, haunting us and waiting for their next victim. After we left our haunted apartment, Sarah and I were determined to find out more about the man and his dolls. We needed to understand what had happened to us and why. We spent hours poring over Craigslist ads, trying to find any information that could lead us to the man's identity. And finally, we found something. There was a local news story about a man who had been arrested for kidnapping and murder. His victims had all been young women, just like us. And when they searched his home, they found dozens of dolls, just like the ones that had haunted us. We were both horrified and relieved to finally have an explanation for what had happened to us. But we knew that we couldn't stop there. We went to the police and told them everything, from the Craigslist ad to the haunting in our apartment. They took our statement and promised to investigate further. But the more we dug, the more we realized just how little we knew. There were still so many unanswered questions, and we couldn't shake the feeling that the man and his dolls were still out there, waiting for their next victim. And then one day, we received a package in the mail. It was a doll, just like the ones that had haunted us. There was no return address, no note. Just the doll and its lifeless eyes staring back at us. We knew then that the man was still out there and that we were still in danger. We didn't know what to do or where to turn, but we knew that we had to keep fighting. We couldn't let the man and his dolls win. Sarah and I were both on edge after receiving the doll in the mail. We knew that the man was still out there and that he was coming for us. We didn't know when or where, but we knew that he wouldn't stop until he had us in his grasp. We contacted the police again, but they told us that there wasn't much they could do without any concrete evidence. They suggested that we stay with friends or family, but we knew that wouldn't keep us safe forever. So we decided to take matters into our own hands. We set a trap for the man, using a Craigslist ad to lure him to a remote location. We waited for hours, our hearts racing with anticipation and fear. And then we saw him, emerging from the shadows with a bag of dolls in his hand. Sarah and I were both frozen with fear, but we knew that we couldn't let him get away again. We sprang into action, tackling him to the ground and holding him down. The man struggled and fought, but we were determined to bring him to justice. We called the police and waited for them to arrive, our hands still shaking with adrenaline. When the police arrived, they took the man into custody and confiscated his dolls. They thanked us for our bravery and promised to do everything they could to ensure that he would never hurt anyone again. Sarah and I were both exhausted but relieved. We had finally put an end to the man's reign of terror, and we could finally start to heal from our own trauma. But even now, years later, I still think about the man and his dolls. I still feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up whenever I see a doll that looks even remotely like one of his creations. And I know that I will never forget the horror that we endured and the bravery that it took to overcome it. In the aftermath of the Craigslist horror story, Sarah and I tried to go back to our normal lives, but it was easier said than done. We had both been deeply traumatized by what we had been through, and the memories of the ordeal lingered on. We knew that we needed help to overcome the trauma, so we both started seeing therapists. We talked about what had happened, our fears, and the anxiety that came with it. We felt that it was the only way to move on from what had happened. As time went on, we began to heal, slowly but surely. We started to feel more comfortable in our own skin, and we began to regain the confidence that had been taken away from us. We were able to talk about the incident more openly with each other, and we found comfort in knowing that we weren't alone. However, we knew that we could never completely forget what had happened. The dolls, the man, and the fear that we felt were all still there, lurking in the back of our minds. We couldn't bring ourselves to throw away the doll that had been sent to us, and we kept it locked up in a box in the closet. We also started to take extra precautions in our daily lives. We were careful about who we spoke to online, and we made sure that we always had someone with us when we went out at night. We also installed security cameras in our apartment, just in case. Despite our efforts to move on, the memories of the Craigslist horror story were still present, but we both knew that we had each other and that we would never let what happened break us apart. Over time, we both started new jobs and even moved into a new apartment together, one that didn't have any creepy dolls lurking around. We both found new hobbies and interests that helped us to feel like ourselves again. However, every year on the anniversary of the ordeal, we still met up in person to reflect on what had happened. We talked about how far we had come and how proud we were of each other for being so strong in the face of such terror. Looking back, we knew that we had been through something truly terrifying, but we had also found strength and bravery that we didn't know we had. We had faced our fears head on and came out the other side. Even in the midst of our trauma, we had found hope and resilience. We had survived the Craigslist horror story, and we had come out stronger and more determined than ever before. And for that, we knew that we could never truly be broken.